So our next team is the Detroit Pistons.
Hmm.
I have been made fun of by Simon for being too high on this team last year, but at least with a caveat that no one expected Cade Cunningham to miss the whole season, which sucks. So first and foremost, I hope that Cade has a really healthy season, but neither of us, it seems, are predicting this to be the year that the Pistons take a big jump, which, I mean, there's like really good and really bad things about this roster. People might
Yeah.
be sleeping on them a little bit because I think because they like disappointed any fans who are expecting them to take a leap, now everyone's just firmly asleep on them and not really expecting much. And they've accumulated some like you know questionable fits on this roster that make it easy to focus on the negative, but there's also a lot of good things. So maybe let's start with the positive of the Pistons, and to me that's
Yeah.
their like a
Let's
lot of
let's go over a couple of their moves. So, I mean, the I'll point out my observation, I guess, after I just briefly go over the things that they did this offseason, which isn't an extensive list, but they had two first round picks. One of them, I believe, was the Celtics pick that they drafted, or no, the Celtics acquired it from the Grizzlies, and then it got traded and ended up in the Pistons' hands.
hmm,
So, anyway, they drafted Osar Thompson, the latter of the Thompson twins,
hmm,
number 5 overall, and then they drafted Marcus Sasser, number 25 overall, which I thought was very interesting. And then they traded for Monte Morris as well as Joe Harris from Brooklyn, just kind of a salary dump. They gave up a second round pick for Monte Morris. They received one or two second round picks for the services of taking on Joe Harris's contract. And then the only other significant thing that they've done to this point this offseason is they re signed Beef Stew to a 4-year, $60 million contract.
beef stew. That's Isaiah Stewart, in case you aren't down with the NBA nickname lingo. It's a
Yeah,
great nickname.
yeah. So I
Top
mean,
tier
they
nickname.
didn't make an incredible amount of moves, but I thought the Marcus Sasser draft pick was interesting. He's an older rookie. Depending on how you project him, probably doesn't have a ton of upside. He's small. Small older guards do occasionally pop in the NBA. We've seen this with Jalen Brunson, and there's a few other occasions. Some of the names escape me at the moment, but it's typically not a draft pick that you're going to make because you're like a bad team and thinking about 5, 6 years down the road. This is typically like a guy that you're hoping will play and make an impact sooner rather than later. And then the Monte Morris trade was interesting as well. So I mean, they're shoring up their guard depth quite a bit instead of just letting Asar Thompson and Jaden Ivey run loose. So to me, that seems like not necessarily like a win now move, but at least like a forward move in terms of competitiveness. I don't think the Pistons are hoping to finish at the bottom of the Eastern Conference like we both have them projected.
Do you think Oscar Thompson will start?
Um, I mean, if he does, it'll be at the 3, or Cade will, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
assuming Jaden Ivey and Cade are starting as well. So if Oscar Thompson is starting, and then they have one of James Wiseman or Jalen Duren starting at the 5, I guess Bogdanovich at the 4. I mean, the spacing is pretty terrible with him in the starting lineup. Um,
But
you
it's
know,
not that much better with any of their other options. Like,
yeah, that's true.
and I don't know that. I mean, I've been higher on Oscar Thompson's jump shooting potential than most people for a while. I didn't look at any summer league stats. I kind of almost never did. He had some incredible plays in summer leagues. I mean, amazing defensive plays and rim attacks or whatever. I'm a lot more excited about the Pistons if it's like Cade, Jaden Ivey, and Thompson like on the floor a lot together. Like that's the core, and I want to see it with Bojan Bogdanovic there to just like provide space for those guys to thrive. And yes, please start Jalen Duren and not James Wiseman or Marvin Bagley. I guess we should applaud the Pistons for not, spending the whole summer chasing some other like redraft big man candidates to add to their center rotation, because James Wiseman and Marvin Bagley being on this roster when they already like Isaiah Stewart enough that they're paying him long term and have a more exciting young prospect that hasn't disappointed us yet in Jalen Duren. It's just like that is a clunky part of their roster until or unless one of those two like pops and becomes important. But even then, like, what does that do to your rotation? Like, in a world where James Wiseman pops off and becomes a real NBA player this year, or Marvin Bagley does, what does that mean for the Pistons? What do they do for there? Like, I don't like understand their front court rotation or how that shakes out, even in a good case scenario where they have too much talent.
Well, they did start Beef Stew, Isaiah Stewart, quite a bit at the 4 last year.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a great long term solution, but I mean, he has been working on his 3 point shot. His physically, he's more the size of a 4, and he does have the foot speed to keep up with a lot of wings due to his smaller stature. Um, you know,
He
and he's also enticing as a small ball 5, but I think if the 3 point shot comes along, like if at least he's like a high 30s corner 3 point shooter, it's somewhat sustainable offensively to have him at the 4.
I thought that Beef Stew in the Pistons games I watched had a like I thought he was pretty disappointing last year. Just like purely on like a performance level. Everyone talked about how the spacing was going to come and how he was going to be a good shooter, and he had a pretty disappointing season in his first year, like, taking more threes. He shot only 32%. And then
Yeah.
defensively, like the foot speed you're talking about is real, and people have been talking about that since he's been in the league, but the amount of times he was getting blown by or just abused on the perimeter, like he just had a bad year playing that kind of defensive role, which makes it hard. Like, you're going to play him who might, or like maybe he'll bounce back. Like I act like, like still a really young player.
Hmm.
The things that he was not quite good at enough last year, he could all of a sudden be good at this year. That's actually like, I think that's a reasonable expectation to have. But if that doesn't, even if he doesn't pop in that, you're playing like a big man who's a like questionable perimeter defender next to like James Wiseman or Marvin Bagley, who are like atrocious backline defenders. Like
Yeah.
it just seems like that guarantees you really, like, it just guarantees you're going to be like one of the bottom 5 defenses in the NBA. And last year they were 28th on defense and are not
Yeah. I
doing
mean,
anything.
I think probably to take advantage of Isaiah Stewart's size and offensive rebounding potential, you probably do need to play him as a small ball 5 ultimately.
But he's
I
not a
just,
rim protector, so it's like you're
right.
kind of like, you're screwed either way.
Yeah. So probably backup 5 is like, his ideal long term fit. But for this current unideal season where they just don't really have a great wing rotation, I think Isaiah Stewart's going to have to fill that role,
Yeah.
whether it's the best idea or not. Yeah, I mean that's probably what they need to look to fix in the long term because this team has like a million guards. So I mean, yeah, you're right. They're probably going to have to play Oscar Thompson at the 3. They're going to have to run some 3 guard lineups just by virtue of how the roster is built.
Yeah. I really am excited about the perimeter talent on the roster. I can't wait to watch, like to get let's get a healthy season of Cade. Let's see if Jaden Ivey can take another step forward to becoming because Jaden Ivey is in this position where you could really see it going either way. Like he gets a little bit better and then he's able to capitalize on those athletic tools and become a really good NBA player, or he struggles with his efficiency and his shooting again. And it's like, we see the tools, but like these tools do not amount to like something that exciting. But you got a really good backup guard in Monte Morris coming off the bench. You got Oscar Thompson filling in like whatever kind of role on the perimeter. Hopefully Joe Harris is a little bit healthier this year and able to be that shooter. Killian Hayes is still in the roster. Alec Burks, like Isaiah Livers. Like there's just a lot of like, there's a lot to be excited about at the 1, 2, and the 3 in terms of like, functional NBA lineups and promising young players and stuff like that. But I just look at that front court and I feel the exact opposite ways. It's just like, this is going to be a rock that you are lugging, or like just a huge anvil that you're lugging around the whole season.
I'm glad you brought up Isaiah Livers because I think, if Bojan Bogdanovic gets moved this season, or at the very least he's not the long term future option. I think Isaiah Livers is a perfectly adequate just swingman piece to help fill the gap.
Yeah, and I think
So
they are a little bit excited about him at least. Like he's not like he is valued
yeah,
internally from
one of the
everything
one
I've
of the
heard
few
from just his
guys on this
organization.
team where he's a good shooter, and he's athletic enough to be pretty versatile defensively as well.
Yeah, I kind of wonder. Well, actually, wait. Two thoughts here before we move on from uh, like you brought up trading Boyan Bogdanovic, and it's like, well, that's one way where they'll have no spacing left on the
Yeah,
roster. And I, at some point, maybe we should do a podcast episode in the middle of the season or something on the type of player he is, where like your job is just to provide NBA functionality for a young core. Like you're like a technician. You're
yeah.
here like working with the kids, and you're just like his one job is just to provide space so that players that aren't necessarily ready in some aspects of their game can play something like normal NBA offense, and that's a thing that yeah, I bet there's an we could do a whole episode on just like that type of player or whatever. Um,
On the
but
other hand, I know Asar Thompson's jump shot possibly isn't trustworthy. Probably won't be his rookie year. Although we've gone over in our talks about the Thompson twins before how we have more faith in the long term upside of Oscar Thompson's jump shot than his brothers.
yeah,
But at the very least, he is a crazy athlete. I think he has enough of a handle to attack a defense, and we all know he's an excellent off the dribble playmaker.
yeah.
So that's another way in which the Pistons can, probably provide a little bit of room to work with, just kind of playing with Oscar Thompson and Cade, having
Yeah,
multiple ball handlers on the floor.
I think that if Astor Thompson pops and Cade Cunningham bounces back and has the season that people have been waiting for him to have, like that's two really exciting building blocks, regardless of anything else. Like two
Yeah.
big, versatile ball handling guards. You could play with anyone that you could play at like three or four. They can each play three or four positions in theory. Like that's an exciting duo. So hopefully Thompson and Cunningham can deliver on that promise. I wonder, with this Pistons team, I wonder if Troy Weaver's just kind of like waiting to see what happens with these three young bigs, like, and is then going to move in a specific direction. Like it's like
Yeah.
it's like this lengthy audition for James Wiseman and Marvin Bagley, and I think no one expects much out of those two. So you can see them if they struggle this year, them moving in a completely different direction with that front court. But if one of them pops, we could be having a very different discussion. If all of a sudden James Wiseman or Marvin Bagley is like a starting level NBA front court piece, probably more likely with Wiseman because he doesn't have the same, like the best version of Marvin Bagley is still, like kind of a Bobby Portis type with more athleticism, sort of like an offensive big man who can survive defensively as a four or as a small ball five on bench lineups, where James Wiseman still has like some raw tools where you picture him as like a backline rim protector who can, like use his talent to score in a variety of ways. But we've just seen such poor defensive IQ from him. It's really until we see some signs that he's going to become like a normal NBA, have a normal NBA level to sort of like read plays and play functional defense. Like until I see that, they're just like, that's not a real NBA player yet. So I think they're waiting to see if they have anything with either of those two players, and then they're going to set a course on what to do with that front court.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not overly worried about at least their center position, just because, I think Jalen Duren showed enough where he at least is going to be, a functional starting center, kind of in the mold of like a Daniel Gafford that we addressed with the Wizards earlier. Just a really good athlete, solid around the rim, offers rim protection to his length and athleticism. Is he ever going to have much of an offensive bag? I mean, probably not. But with him and Beef Stew, I think with Marvin Bagley and James Wiseman, you're going to play them because you kind of have to this season just to try them out and see if something pops, but you're not like putting money of your eggs in those baskets. Those are just like bonus pieces that are going to be nice if they work out.
I'm more just like, if neither of those two aforementioned players pop. I just think they're getting in the way of the actual functional front court pieces that they have. It's just like
Yeah.
why they do have some eggs currently in that basket, and that's what kind of holds me back from being excited about the Pistons. It's just like, well, both those guys they want to give like 20 minutes a game to, so like what does that mean for the like promising rookie center who might actually be good, and what does that mean for the guy who they just signed? Like Beef Stew is currently their biggest long-term money on the books, so it's just
Yeah.
weird that they had two projects at the same position that like are they just feel in the way until one of them proves that there's like a reason. Marvin Bagley is like 24. James Wiseman is going to turn 22 soon. At what point do they abort that experiment kind of thing?
Well,
Because it
I
is
think
taking up a lot of space.
no, you're right, and I think they abort it whenever we switch to trying to compete mode. So the past couple of years, last year especially with Cade hurt, you're just throwing guys out there and seeing what they can show you.
Yeah.
You're not really trying to build a functional lineup. There's potentially the Detroit Pistons switch to, at least early in the season before things start to go south, and then they start jockeying for draft position. Potentially, the first half of the season, they are going to try to build functional lineups. And I think in that scenario, Wiseman and Marvin Bagley aren't playing a lot of minutes because these aren't winning NBA players. And then, your five rotation is Stewart and Duran. Maybe you have Bogdanovich and Livers play the four and, just run three guards most of the time. So
Yeah.
that's probably the Pistons' best immediate path to trying to win games.
Yeah.
I hope we see that for at least a portion of the season because, like, you're right. I do want to see what it looks like when everyone's healthy and everyone's playing together. Like, how many more years do we have to wait before the Pistons are ready to try to start winning?
Yeah. I think Pistons, like realistic best case scenario is healthy season for Cade Cunningham, promising rookie season for Osser. Any kind of step forward from Jaden Ivey that makes him seem like he's going to be a part of the plans. And then just like two of their front court players looking like they are worth hanging on to. Like I think that's a realistic best case scenario, and even possibly a path to surprisingly more wins. But I feel like even more like I feel pretty comfortable just because of the messiness of the Detroit Pistons roster that they're going to be at the bottom of the standings. But I mean, Cade looked pretty good for a minute before he got hurt, and this is a team that could leapfrog a whole bunch of teams if some of their young talent um, is what they hope they are.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely.
And then worst case scenario, I think we've already covered, and just like awful front court glut that makes everyone look worse on offense and defense, and then like Cade not being healthy, or Jaden Ivey stagnating, or Osser not really being as promising as we hope he is, things like that.
Yeah,
So
I mean, if we don't go down the route of injuries, then I think worst case scenario is just like defensively, there's not a lot of cohesion, and there's just not the collective basketball IQ to compete at that level. And then offensively, it's just awkward and doesn't really work due to the lack of shooting.
yeah, and then also like a big thing we really need to see, like Cade just has not shot the ball well yet, and we all just keep
Mhm.
assuming that that's what his game is going to be built around, like the combination of like a really high level pull up game and really strong playmaking skills with like decent size and length. So if one of those things isn't true, we're talking about a different kind of player, or just like you're
Yeah.
kind of downgrading him to a sort of like solid starter rather than like a foundational piece that you drafted number one overall. So I think Cade by far is the most important thing to monitor, because he's
Mhm.
shooting 30% from three in 76 games over 2 seasons. So that's not a great start, but it's also such a small sample size that we can't say that he's not a good shooter yet. And everyone thinks he's
Yeah.
going to be a good shooter. Just we need to see it, Cade. So
Well, yeah, I
stay
mean,
healthy and knock down some shots.
almost all those games he was a rookie, and then also like the first. Maybe it's unfair to say the first half, like the first third of his rookie season, he was just so ice cold. He couldn't make anything. And then
Yeah.
he kind of turned it on later in the year. So
Yeah.
there's
I mean,
upside there.
yeah, there's definitely upside with Cade. It's just he's a strange kind of prospect. Like we do have like he is considered the foundational piece in Detroit, and we really don't know what kind of player he's going to be.
Yeah.
And he's kind of mysterious in that way. Like people kind of casually call him 6'8" when he's clearly like 6'6", and people rave about his shooting, and he's
A
shooting
bad shooter.
30% from three, and
Yeah.
like the playmaking looks solid but hasn't yielded crazy results yet. I mean, his whole rookie season they didn't have a lob threat for him, which is part of why they brought in Marvin Bagley. Now they have Jalen Duren. Like I want to see Cade Cunningham running pick and rolls and hitting that lob man like he did, like he's done so well in high school and university. So like yeah, big year for Cade, because I think a lot of people are waiting to see, like, is this the next Grant Hill, or is this kind of just a good starting versatile guard?
Or is this the next Grant Hill, who looks promising and then gets hurt?
Yeah, oof. Well, hopefully not that.